How many times have you heard people praise or criticize The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess for being one of the darker, edgier games in the franchise? I'm sure you've heard it time and time again. Twilight Princess was my first Zelda game, and since it's the best-selling game in the series, well, at least until Breath of the Wild beats it out sooner or later, I imagine it's a lot of other people's introduction to the series as well. When people think of Zelda games being dark in tone, Twilight Princess and Majora's Mask are the games that immediately come to mind. And you know what? That is right to an extent. Though I would argue that nearly every Zelda game has its own share of darkness to it. Since the franchise's inception, it was very much inspired by medieval high fantasy, so it kinda comes with the territory. But what rubs me the wrong way is when people act as if Twilight Princess in specific is just the darkest, most edgy and depressing and miserable game in the series. I really could not disagree more. About a year ago, I took the pleasure of replaying the game, and for every giant-possessed Stalfos and dying child Zora, there was a traveling Uka mother and son acting as a teleportation item in dungeons, and a Yeti couple sharing a loving embrace that generates a heart container surrounded by a whole bunch of hearts. This is a scene from, quote, the darkest Zelda game ever. I mean, yeah, it was preceded by a boss fight where we see the woman's head turn around at 180 degrees, which honestly gives me a fright to this day. But there is so much lighthearted stuff to balance these things out. In that sense, it's not too different from any other Zelda game. I'm sure you've heard Twilight Princess get compared to Ocarina of Time, to the point of people treating it as a pseudo-remake. I think this comparison is honestly kind of unfair, considering Ocarina of Time in itself borrows a lot from A Link to the Past. You go through a grass, fire, and water-themed dungeon, retrieve the Master Sword, witness the oh shit moment, and go through 6 more dungeons before slaying Ganon. This trope continues into other Zelda games before and after Ocarina, yet for some reason people single out Twilight Princess for doing it? Maybe because it didn't have transformation masks or a big ocean to travel through to make it more unique. Whatever the reason is, today I want to compare Ocarina of Time to Twilight Princess to show how they aren't alike. Ocarina of Time starts out as playful as ever. You're a young boy who wakes up one day to meet his fairy companion, and you're told to grab a sword and shield from the forest populated entirely by other children, and then help out the Great Deku Tree. Your next 2 dungeons are also very colorful journeys where you meet friendly cultures who help you on your way. Well, mostly friendly. When you get the Master Sword and become an adult, you leave the Temple of Time and see how much Ganondorf has changed the world for the 7 years you were gone. Go back to Kokiri Forest, things aren't as lively. Go to Death Mountain, most of the Gorons have been imprisoned. Visit Zora's domain, everything and everyone is frozen. When you finish the first chapter, everything that was once whimsical and happy is now barren and desolate. As the game goes on, things progressively get worse and more bleak for the game's world and people. Now let's bring things back to Twilight Princess. Before you can even think of the first dungeon, your village is attacked, your girlfriend is kidnapped, and your friends are all missing. You go out to save them, only to find you've entered the Shadow Realm, become a wolf, and now have to take orders from a tiny baby girl who can fly and has a giant hand coming out of her hair. Hey, Midna was Bayonetta 3 years early! Anyway, you escape from prison, meet up with Zelda, learn about how Zant took over and transformed Hyrule, and then go back to the Faron Woods to get all the Tears of Light back to bring this area back to normal. Then you finally get to do the first dungeon, and the next 2 dungeons are preceded by similar fetch quests where you have to drive the Twilight out of Hyrule. It's a restoration kind of deal. To advance through the game, you have to make things less dark and miserable. When you're done with the first 3 dungeons, you have to help Midna when she nearly dies in a confrontation with Zant. You then get the Master Sword, and it's here when Midna gets her hands on a stone that lets Link turn into a wolf anytime he wants. When Link first became a wolf, he was devastated. He's suddenly taken this weird form against his will that he's forced to learn and get used to. But now we're celebrating the fact that he can be a wolf all he wants. Eventually we get to face Zant again, and here, the menacing, mysterious, creepy figure we've been shown earlier in the game is replaced with this goofy-ass monkey man. And how does he die? Does he get decapitated? Does he get burned alive? Does he get stabbed in the face? No, he bursts like a balloon! Do you notice anything by now? The big difference between Ocarina of Time and Twilight Princess? Their tones are basically inverted. Ocarina of Time goes from happy-go-lucky kid adventures to trudging through lonesome areas where everyone who isn't dead, frozen, or captured is sad about having to serve their new dictator. Twilight Princess starts off having to liberate the world from a dark presence, then it turns into meeting new exotic people to progress the story. Ocarina of Time got edgier as it went on, while Twilight Princess, despite being renowned for its darker tone, got less and less dark as it goes on. I think it's unfair that a lot of people think less of this game for its edginess when it isn't much more edgy than a lot of other Zelda games and has no shortage of the charm and whimsicality that Zelda is beloved for. If you're not a fan of the edgy stuff, consider taking another look at Twilight Princess and you just might find that there's still a lot to love.